The grand ballroom of Carlton House glittered under the light of 1,000 candles, the crystal chandeliers casting prismatic rainbows across the gilt-edged mirrors and the dazzling jewels of the assembled nobility. It was June 1814, and London was drunk on victory. Napoleon had been exiled to Elba, and the city pulsed with the celebratory energy of a continent finally at peace. For Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales, the only child of the Prince Regent and the heir to the British throne, the night was just another gilded cage. At 18 years old, she was the most eligible and most trapped young woman in Europe. The heat from so many bodies was oppressive, the air thick with perfume and the cloying sweetness of hothouse flowers. Charlotte stood beside her father, George, Prince Regent, a man whose immense girth was trussed into a field marshal's uniform that strained at every seam. He was in his element, holding court, his conversation a series of theatrical pronouncements meant to display his wit. Charlotte smiled when she was supposed to, curtsied when a foreign dignitary approached. But her mind was elsewhere. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not with the hopeful gaze of a girl seeking a dance partner, but with the acute awareness of a prisoner studying the walls. The cause of her desperation stood across the room, engaged in stiff conversation with a Prussian diplomat. He was thin, pale, and sported a perpetually bewildered expression. This was William, the hereditary Prince of Orange, or Slender Billy, as Charlotte privately and contemptuously called him. Under immense pressure from her father and the British government, who saw the match as a vital diplomatic tool to secure a powerful Dutch ally, Charlotte had been forced into an engagement with him the previous December. The marriage contract was signed, the treaties drafted. To the outside world, she was a princess on the cusp of a glorious union. In reality, she felt she was being sentenced to a life of loveless exile. The terms of the marriage were a noose around her neck. As future Queen of England, she was expected to eventually reside in Britain, but as wife to the Prince of Orange, her primary duty would be to live in Holland. The very thought of leaving her homeland, of being permanently separated from the only people who showed her genuine affection, filled her with a cold, creeping dread. She had begged her father to allow a clause in the treaty guaranteeing she could stay in England. He had dismissed her concerns with a wave of his bejeweled hand, assuring her that such matters would be arranged. But Charlotte was not naive. She had seen how her father's promises dissolved like sugar in tea. He had promised her mother a place in her life, and then isolated her. He had promised Charlotte freedom, and then sold her to the Dutch. A movement near the grand terrace doors caught her eye. It was Captain Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, a young German prince who, like so many others, was in London for the victory celebrations. He was not flashy like the Russian officers with their chests full of medals, nor was he boorish like the English lords who drank too much and laughed too loudly. Leopold was quiet, but handsome in a serious, intellectual way, and carried himself with a calm dignity that was utterly at odds with the posturing peacocks in the ballroom. Their eyes met for a brief moment. He offered the smallest, most respectful incline of his head. Charlotte felt a strange flutter in her chest, a feeling she quickly suppressed. She was an engaged woman, a political asset. Such feelings were luxuries she could not afford. The evening wore on. The regent, deep in conversation with the French ambassador, finally released his hold on Charlotte's arm. Seeing her chance for a moment of respite, she murmured an excuse and slipped away from the main throng, making her way towards the quieter, cooler Chang Lang that led to the private royal apartments. She needed to think, to breathe air not tainted by courtly intrigue. Once she walked past the liveried footmen who stood like statues, past the doors leading to the state dining room, until she reached a less frequented corridor. It was there, standing by a window overlooking the dark expanse of St. James's Park, that she found her salvation. He was not a courtier, not a diplomat. He wore the simple, dark blue uniform of a foot guard, and his posture was ramrod straight, his eyes fixed forward even in the semi-darkness. He was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with a soldier's weathered hands and a face that spoke more of duty than of dreams. Charlotte knew him by sight, though they had never exchanged a word. His name was Thomas, a private soldier in the King's Guard, one of the countless men who made the machinery of the palace run invisibly. He was stationed at this post every Tuesday and Thursday night, a fact Charlotte knew because she had made it her business to learn the patterns of the palace's sentinels. In a world where she was watched constantly, she had become an expert watcher herself. She paused, ensuring no one else was in sight. The sound of the distant orchestra was a muffled, ghostly waltz. Charlotte took a breath, steeling herself. This was madness. This was a risk that could destroy her. But the image of slender Billy's vacant face, the memory of her father's callous disregard, the suffocating weight of her own powerlessness, it all crystallized in that moment into a desperate resolve. She took a step closer to the soldier. He remained immobile, but she saw the faint twitch of surprise in his jaw. She didn't speak. Words were dangerous, echoey things in these marble halls. Instead, she moved with the practiced grace of a performer. She let her gaze drift casually down the hall, a pantomime of a bored princess taking a stroll. Then, as she passed close to him, her right hand, which had been resting at her side, lifted slightly. With her index finger, she traced a single, deliberate shape against the deep blue fabric of her silk gown. It was not a random gesture. It was the shape of a key. She did it once, then again, her eyes never meeting his, her face a mask of serene indifference. She continued her slow walk, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she was certain he could hear it. She reached the end of the short corridor, paused to look at a painting she had seen 1,000 times, and then slowly turned to retrace her steps. As she passed him again, she did not repeat the gesture. She simply let her hand, which now held a small embroidered handkerchief, drop to the floor. It landed softly between them. Without breaking stride, she continued back towards the roar of the ballroom, leaving the small square of linen on the cold marble. Inside, the party continued. The regent barely glanced at her as she resumed her place by his side. For the next hour, Charlotte performed her duty with mechanical precision, laughing at jokes she didn't hear, curtsying to people she didn't see. All her senses were focused on the corridor behind her. Had he understood? Was he even now reporting her strange behavior to an officer? Had her foolish romantic heart just signed her own warrant? An eternity passed. Finally, the regent announced his intention to retire, and the formal part of the evening ended. Charlotte, feigning a headache, bade her good nights and retreated to her own suite of rooms in Warwick House, the adjacent, far more modest dwelling she was permitted to occupy. Her lady-in-waiting, the ever-faithful and discreet Mercer Elphinstone, helped her undress and dismissed the other servants. Charlotte climbed into her canopied bed, but sleep was impossible. She lay in the darkness, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The night deepened. The sounds of the palace faded into a profound silence, broken only by the distant cry of a watchman. And then, a sound so soft, it was barely a whisper against the silence. A scrape. The faintest click of metal. It came from the direction of the small, private door in her sitting room. A door that led to a servant's stairwell and was always kept locked from the outside. Charlotte sat bolt upright, her blood running cold. She grabbed a silk robe and crept to the door of her bedchamber, pressing her ear against the wood. She heard it again, a footstep carefully placed. Fear and exhilaration fought within her. She slowly turned the handle and peered into the dimly lit sitting room. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the faint moonlight coming through the window. He was tall, and he held his bearskin hat under his arm. It was Thomas. He had understood. He had found the handkerchief, a silent plea wrapped in linen. And he had done the unthinkable. He had left his post. And he had used a key, God only knew how he had obtained it, to unlock a door that should have remained sealed for eternity. He had broken every rule, defied every order, and risked a firing squad, all because a princess had drawn a shape in the air. He dropped to one knee as she entered, his head bowed. "Your Royal Highness," he whispered, his voice rough with tension. I found this." He held up the handkerchief. Charlotte did not take it. She walked towards him, her bare feet silent on the thick rug. She stopped just before him, close enough to see the rapid rise and fall of his chest beneath his tunic. She reached down and gently touched his shoulder, feeling the solid muscle tense beneath her fingertips. "Stand up," she whispered. He rose, towering over her. In the gloom, his eyes were unreadable, but they held hers with a directness no courtier would ever dare. "You came," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Why?" He swallowed hard. "Because a person in distress signaled for help, ma'am, and I am a soldier. It is my duty." Charlotte felt a lump form in her throat. He spoke of duty, but his actions spoke of something far greater. He had seen not a princess, but a person. In that moment, in the silent, forbidden darkness of her sitting room, Princess Charlotte of Wales was not a political pawn or a royal heir. She was just a terrified girl, and he was the first person who had ever made her feel truly seen. The conspiracy, born of a silent signal, had begun.